Hello, friends. Welcome back. Delighted with the reception that the first episode has received. Got many more views than our standard views, and we are back again. This is the Magic Moments 2. Let's start with a story. So, do you know that in 1976, India won a test match that the rest of the world lamented for the best part of the next 15 years? The test match was against the West Indies again, and the parties that stood lamented were England, Australia, and everybody else for the next 15 years. What happened then? What was the story? We saw in the last episode that in 1971, India won its first ever test series in the West Indies. Following that, India had success in England, very good home series wins till 1974 when the wheels came off and India lost 3-0 to England, including a loss of 42 all out at Lord's, the home of cricket. The Indian cricket started nosediving. Then again, it picked up a little bit. Gavaskar was now a senior pro. Bishan, Chandra, and Erapalli Prasanna were trying their best to resurrect the thing. But the team that was on the upsurge was the mighty West Indies. In the first limited overs World Cup that was held in 1975, West Indies won a thrilling final against Australia. Clive Lloyd's young team, including a very young, great fielder, Viv Richards, who effected 3 runouts in the final, won. The team was being stacked with good batsmen and very good bowlers. Following that, Australia called West Indies, invited them for a 6-test series, and the result was 5-1 to Australia. So after the high of the World Cup, the West Indies were not happy. There were a lot of problems with the umpiring, according to them, and they came home dejected from that tour. Guess who awaited them when they returned home? It was the Indian team again. The things have changed by this time with the Indian team also, and we are looking at a team where Sunil Gavaskar was a senior pro. There were youngsters like Anshuman Gaikwad making their way. Vishwanath is a settled batsman now, and Mohinder Amarnath, renowned for his pace playing abilities, has made it into the team. The bowlers are still the same, more or less, with the addition of Madan Lal, who was making waves in the national circuit. This is where the test series starts, and we pick up the action from the first test of the series. So, the West Indies were supposed to be very strong, and on a pitch that they liked, they rolled over India in the first test for 177 paltry runs. The bowling attack of Michael Holding, who was opening the bowling, alongside likes of Bernard Julian and Andy Roberts, and there were a couple of good spinners like Holford and Jumadin. These people formed a decent but a formidable attack, and they eventually bowled India out for 177. In reply, the West Indies batting, which was their strength, got to work. The inimitable Viv Richards started scoring freely. He had already made a strong impression when he had come to India a year earlier, but now he was beginning to approach his pomp. Fascinating century by him, another one by Clive Lloyd, and 93 by Alvin Kallicharan led West Indies to a lead of more than 300. There was no chance India was going to make it, and we lost the first test badly by an innings. This looked like a very, very strong West Indies side, and the Indian team seemed to have come down from its level. Bishan Singh Bedi, the captain, had been bowling really well, but it seemed like this was not enough to stop this train. As it would turn out, the second test was at Trinidad. Sunil Gavaskar, in his autobiography, says, "Trinidad, I love you." Why does he say that? Of course, he had made his test debut there. He had his 124 and 220 also at Trinidad in 1971. But in the second test, India spinners turned up and bowled West Indies out for 240. And in reply, they scored 402 for 5 declared. Needless to say who led the way. It was Sunil Gavaskar again with a majestic 156. And India finished the position very strong with a lead of more than 160 runs. On the final day, West Indies limped along to 215 for 8 before the play was called off, and we were robbed of what would have been a certain victory. There was no play on day 1 due to rain, and unfortunately, even though we had dominated the test, West Indies still led the series 1-0. The third test was supposed to be played at Antigua, but there was horrible weather in Antigua. It was almost certain that all the 5 days of the test would be washed out. So at the last moment, the board of the West Indies decided that if the teams are still in Trinidad, the wicket is good enough, why not play a test in Trinidad itself rather than have a washout? Indian team seemed to love it. Trinidad was their natural surface, and as it turned out, it was the site of probably India's finest test victory over many, many years. It began in fine fashion for the West Indies again. Viv Richards went on his merry way and scored a majestic 177. Thrashing spinners to all corners of the ground, and the medium pace of Madan Lal and Eknath Solkar was no match for the mighty Viv. West Indies scored a healthy 359. Remember, this was a wicket that was being used for the second consecutive test match, so 359 should have been a very good score. And the bowling attack, led by Michael Holding, ensured that that was the case indeed, and India were bowled out for 228. Very, very paltry total and a lead of 130 for the West Indies. considering how the series had gone, with the first test being an innings win, and of course, second test being a close one, but still the series being 1-0, it was assumed that West Indies would come out flying, and then, they would just decimate us. In the third innings, that is exactly what they started doing. Alvin Kallicharan again scoring a majestic 100, a magnificent effort from his part, and the diminutive left-hander just enthralled everybody with his stroke play. Fantastic innings, and West Indies got to 404 as a lead by the middle of day 4. So they thought that 400 is more than enough. The highest chase in the history of the sport till that time had been 404 by the Don Bradman's Invincible. So it was known that 404 is absolutely unchaseable, least of all by this Indian team that was struggling to find its feet with the bat, except for Sunil Gavaskar. So they declared, and I think any sane captain would declare. India started consciously and confidently. Remember, they had more than 150 overs to bat out, so they had to bat out for a draw. An outside chance was that if they managed to bat out the 150 overs, they might get pretty close to 404 runs. Nobody thought that would be possible. So Anshuman Gaikwad and Sunil Gavaskar started confidently. Sunil Gavaskar looked absolutely fluent, but the memory started coming back, having played a brilliant innings of 156 the previous test match. He seemed primed for another big innings, and by the end of the first day, India were nicely placed at 134 for 1. Of course, there were no thoughts of any victory that were being entertained at this point, but at 134 for 1, we knew that we needed to bat out 90 overs to ensure a draw. Because at that time, there was no regulation of 90 overs, but there was a period of time that we were supposed to bat. And with 9 wickets in hand, we knew that there was a fair chance that we would bat this out. Nobody in the remotest dreams seemed to think that this would end up in a victory or anything, but at least we were there. Sunil Gavaskar was batting beautifully, 90 not out overnight, and the next morning, he carefully resumed his batting. He recalls in his autobiography that the fluency that he had found on day 4 was all gone, and he really, really struggled. He just knew that he had to carry on batting for his team's cause. Slowly and steadily, he got to his 100. This was his 4th 100 at Trinidad in just his second tour, and he seemed to have the measure of it. The crowd again went wild. Of course, there were rapturous appreciation, but Clive Lloyd was beginning to get worried because he, at the end of it, saw that there was some problem that was brewing for the West Indies bowling. He had 2 spinners, 1 medium pacer, and 1 really fast Michael Holding, but it did not seem to worry Indians too much on a day 5 pitch. So he kept bowling Padmore and Jumadin, the 2 spinners. Gavaskar got out soon after scoring his 100 for 102. And then the wonderful partnership of 2 extremely classy batsmen of pace bowling, Gundappa Vishwanath and Mohinder Amarnath, started flowering. Slowly and steadily, they started building up runs, and those 2 were so fluent batsmen that we knew that if they stayed on for long, they would not be kept quiet. Mohinder was always known to be an excellent player of fast bowling, as he would go on to prove in the later half of his career. And Gundappa Vishwanath was, well, according to Sunil Gavaskar, the classiest batsman of the Indian team. Slowly and steadily, the partnership started building. They saw things through to lunch. Tea was about to approach, and Gundappa Vishwanath got his 100. Indian score was nearing 300 runs for the loss of just 2 wickets, and everybody was beginning to think of the unthinkable. Could we really do it? This was the 4th innings. This was the West Indies. Michael Holding at his fastest, Clive Lloyd, the captain, Viv Richards. This was such a wonderful team that they were building. Could we really put one upon them after scoring 404? Looked highly unlikely. Yet, the belief was starting to come. Around tea, there were a lot of shouts as to what should be our approach, whether we should go for the target or not. But Mohinder was in such a fine nick that he kept going for runs. Gundappa Vishwanath, after scoring his century, got out with about 70 runs to go, and in came Brijesh Patel. Brijesh Patel had been a revelation. He had scored well in the second test also, and here he seemed absolutely confident and in full nick to go for the runs. He was the perfect batsman you would want at number 5 for that tour, and he began so fluently. The runs started coming at a quick pace, and Mohinder also started pulling and hooking and driving and cutting everyone, and within no time the target seemed to be within reach. Mohinder got out at 85 with just 15 runs to go, and India seemed to believe that now the match was firmly in their grasp. 392 for 4, 15 runs to go, and more than 10 overs to play. There was only going to be one result from then. Brijesh Patel started smashing the bowlers, and within no time, at 402 for 4, he smashed a boundary to covers and ran wildly. 406 for 4, India had done it. The highest chase in the history of the game till that point, and a record that stayed put for 27 more years. This was the most wonderful achievement nobody could have ever thought of. India was reeling from the effects of home loss to the West Indies, loss to England away, and this was the perfect elixir that brought life to Indian cricket back again. Nobody in their wildest dreams could have imagined this story to unfold, but India, against all odds, had done it. Who was the center of the story again? I might be tired of speaking of his name over and over again, but that's how good he was in the West Indies. Mohinder Amarnath, who played beautifully and chased the target down, he was the archetypal finisher, as you would say. And Gundappa Vishwanath, again one of Indian cricket's greatest heroes, underrated, I would say, was not got the glory that he actually deserved. 406 for 4, the way for India was only up. What was the context of the series now? One test to play at Jamaica, 1-all, and Clive Lloyd was under immense pressure. Yes, his team had won the World Cup earlier, but his team had been blanked out in Australia, 5-1, terrible loss, and now he was staring at an average Indian team trying to put one up on him. A home series loss would have surely meant that Lloyd was gone for all his money. He also had an important England tour coming up. So, to silence his critics, he knew that corrective steps had to be taken. While reflecting on this, he realized that the biggest problem that he had was a slow pitch, and second, spinners were not really effective. He decided that that was that. For the next 10-15 years, West Indies would not rely on any spinner to deliver them the victory. May it be the first innings, second innings, or the fourth innings, it was going to be brutally fast. He communicated the message to the groundsmen at Sabina Park in Jamaica. Indian batsmen were not known for their proficiency in playing pace. He chose Michael Holding, Wayne Daniel, Bernard Julian, and Van Burn Holder to have a go at India. There were no regulations of bowling bouncers at that point, so he thought that this will be the best way to get one up on India. And if he cannot defeat them in terms of getting them out, his bowlers might as well injure them and get them out. No helmets, remember. The fourth test, Sabina Park in Jamaica, is an epic test that would define how Test cricket would be played for the next 10 years. India were put into bat first on a fast wicket, chose to bat first, and the West Indies were in no mood of pitching any ball in the Indian half of the batting. Everything was pitch short and the goings were very slow. Gavaskar was excellent technically, so he was not under any trouble, but even he had a problem fending off a couple of balls and got injured on his hands. Anshuman Gaikwad was having a torrid time. He got injured at his chest, at his back, everywhere there were bruises, but he gamely carried on. Only 67 overs were bowled in the first day, and the score meandered along to around 140 for 1. It was a poor day for cricket, but at the end of the day, in a press conference, Clive Lloyd said that I hope Indians were not expecting us to bowl full tosses at them. Now, imagine the arrogance from someone that big against a batsman that had just scored 406 for 4. By day 2, things really started getting bad. The West Indies went overboard with their short ball strategy. Anshuman Gaikwad was forced to retire hurt because he was bruised all over and started having lots of problems staying back. There was another injury to Brijesh Patel also, who was hit on the nose. And by late day 2, it was almost certain that West Indies were not in a mood to just get us out. They were in the mood to knock us off. So at 306 for 6, Bishan declared, allowing West Indies to have a go. India started bowling really well, and with about 70 runs of lead for India, West Indies were 6 down. So we thought that this might be another close test match. But then the West Indies umpiring started coming in the way. Michael Holding scored a lusty 50, and West Indies ended up with a lead of 85 runs over India. So 391 was what West Indies managed. What happened next is something that is dug deep in the annals of shame in the history of cricket. West Indies continued with their bouncer barrage. A couple of batsmen were again forced to be hurt, and the strategy just seemed to kill the Indians, as they would say. The crowd was loving it. They were jeering and cheering everyone on, and Michael Holding and Wayne Daniel were way too fast to be handled by the rest of them. So, at 97 for 5, Bishan decided that enough was enough. He could not put his team in further danger. There were already 3 batsmen who were back in the hospital, and there was only himself and Chandra left. There was no point carrying on. So, at 97 for 5, there came an epic declaration. Bishan, almost in protest, declared, telling the West Indies to go ahead and have the series if this is how they wanted to win. Well, the West Indies wanted it anyhow, so they were not ashamed of scoring those 12 runs and eventually won the 4th test by 10 wickets. 2-1 to the West Indies, but a very, very poor show of sportsmanship all around. The reactions to this were mixed. People were thrilled that the West Indies were going at a newfound approach towards Test cricket, but at the same time, without any protective gear, such fast men going at batsmen was not a particularly good advertisement of cricket. As we know, the West Indies team would stick to this template for the best part of the next 15 years and reap unheard riches. They would win everywhere across the world, blanking teams, whitewashing, blackwashing people, and win another World Cup, get close in another one. So across formats, they were the dominant team, probably the best team in the history to play the game. But this is how it started. A 406 for 4 chase ignited the fire in Clive Lloyd that led to a battery of fast bowlers coming through. Eventually, the quartet would be formed. Michael Holding, Joel Garner, Andy Roberts, Colin Croft, followed by the most dangerous of them all, Malcolm Marshall. But let's not forget, it was Trinidad again that provided the fire for the Test cricket for the next 15 years.